Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind, bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
I'm Jason.
And I ain't your pal, dickface. It's Bloodsport time.
Oh, that's a good quote. There's a lot of those fun little quips like that.
Yeah, Bloodsport, one of the most underwritten but overperforming movies that I've ever seen.
It's a lot and it's nothing, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
You have to see it.
And that's what we're going to be talking about here today on our primer, spoiler-free episode. Going to get into all of those details right now. Yeah, no, it's your choice.
Yeah. This was my birthday choice. I had seen it before, and it was when I was actually an MMA fighter, so it was brought back good memories.
Nice.
Yeah, it's such a great MMA movie. It's one of the first MMA movies, really.
I mean, it somewhat inspired the MMA movement in a sense, right? Like, as a separate note, I asked Magic Mike if he'd ever seen Bloodsport. He was like, only 1,000 times, man.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I thought this might be a Mike movie.
Yeah, it definitely would be.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so do you want to talk plot? What little there is?
Yeah. So, it's 1988. Bloodsport is potentially, like we said, the inspiration for MMA.
The inspiration for MMA in the sense of in a more organized manner, right?
Yes.
It's not like this invented Muay Thai or
No.
Jiu-Jitsu or anything like that.
It's the first time on screen anybody had brought all of the different styles that are very different together to fight each other that we know of. There might be some because this is also based off earlier Japanese fight movies.
I mean, there's even influence from Rocky I noticed as well, right?
Yeah, I could see that. But getting such vastly different styles is, I think, the key thing here. And honestly, even new MMA isn't that vastly different anymore. Everyone's doing very similar things.
Yeah, that's actually something that maybe we'll talk about more in the deep dive, but there is something almost retro fresh about the fights in this movie, which is part of the exciting element of it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's definitely our cheesiest movie yet, and has the most slow-mo, least dialogue, most grunts, beating out Conan, Arnold in Conan.
Yeah, definitely my favorite grunts too on the podcast so far.
Yeah. When they're doing the slow-mo and there's just a dubbed in grunt and it's just weird.
Yeah.
Pretty fun. You have to see it.
You missed as well, maybe the most montage heavy movie of all time.
Yeah, that's one of the longest montages, and you get multiple.
If you can think of a good montage, it's probably in this movie.
Yeah.
A good theme for one. All right, let's go back to plot.
Yeah, okay. So Frank Dux is Jean-Claude.
Frank Dukes.
Sorry.
Put him up.
Yes, put him up. Frank Dukes is in the military. He's a badass fighter. He grew up training with some neighbor kid, I guess, and his dad, Tanaka's. And I don't know where to go.
The way you describe that is so funny because that's how it feels. Here's just some neighbor guy who's gonna train him now for the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's very silly, very ridiculous. He goes to try and steal his sword and then ends up being taught by a master of a certain type of fighting, and he was basically taught to fight in all styles. So now that he's an adult, he is going to fight in the Kumite, which is underground MMA fight between all the different countries of the world and all their styles to see who is the best fighter. Happens every 5 years. This one is in Hong Kong, and this whole movie's shot in Hong Kong, which is super cool.
Yeah.
And we watch him fight a 3-day fight or 3-day tournament.
Yeah, and honestly, the premise alone there is just so goddamn cool. You just checked off every box of I'm in Hong Kong in the 80s, I'm in MMA style underground fight tournament, I'm in. Mm-hmm. Just all of the components of this movie, it's pretty hard to have a miss here. And like you said, the plot is just so thin in this one that at points in time though, the elevated nature, the excitement of this movie, it's able to like continue to propel you through everything without being like, what's happening right now?
Yeah, exactly. And this probably has the most actual fight scenes in a movie that are just, they're interrupted slightly, but it's basically a movie of just fight scenes and a little bit of montage and dialogue outside of that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the most fight heavy movie and so 80s. So that's basically why I picked this.
Yeah. Characters and people you may know. So we've talked about Frank Dukes, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, and his first movie role, actually. This is the one that put him on the map. He's a Belgian actor, and I was trying the entire time I watched this. This is actually, I guess, as a note for the podcast, like, this is my first time actually watching a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie.
I think this was my first one as well. So many people know of him. Almost everybody knows of him, but not many people have watched it. So that's why I wanted to do this one too.
You know, I put Stallone in the same like category as Jean-Claude Van Damme and Arnold Schwarzenegger, even though Stallone was like primarily a movie star.
Yeah.
But like I put Stallone and Schwarzenegger in like the A tier, like the S tier of fighters who are great movie performers. And then like Dave Bautista is like, you know, starting to hover into that range too.
And like you can't forget like Jackie Chan, who like I think everybody's watched like Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Jet Li. Again, we could have watched any of those actors like old movies. Nobody's seen a bunch of these fighting movies from the vintage times.
Yeah. And so Jean-Claude Van Damme just falls like slightly, maybe like a half tier to a tier below those actors. Like he's not a household name like quite, but if you said that name, you would have a general idea of like, I think part of it is just the name, Jean-Claude Van Damme. Like what else is this guy doing but fighting?
He was a pretty boy who had an accent and was in the movies. So like I think everybody in the 80s knew of him, and that's how it persisted. And like if anybody mentions Jean-Claude Van Damme, you imagine him doing the splits.
Yes.
So like that's iconic.
Oh, 100%. There's a lot of iconic like scenes and moments of the movie and just like little pieces like that where, like we'll talk about in all that fun stuff in the deep dive. Yeah. Jean-Claude Van Damme, also known for Double Impact, Universal Soldier, Hard Target, Time Cop. Time Cop I've been meaning to watch for forever. The only movie that I've actually seen him in is The Expendables 2, because I haven't seen a lot of those 80s, 90s movies. So
yeah. Oh, I completely forgot. Like that's a great way for people to have seen him recently.
Yeah. So he's our main character, Frank Dukes, who Frank, like I think you described him pretty well because this movie is completely focused around him. Funny enough, like this movie is based on a true character.
It says so at the end that this is based on a true story.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that pretty heavily in the deep dive, actually, because just the minor note here, because it almost feels like irrelevant for like 90% of the movie and until the very end, but just something that's interesting to talk about in the deep dive. Ray Jackson is Frank's friend during the fight tournament. He plays this like 6'4", like he's this hulking man. Like I kind of picture him on par with like a was it Hogan?
Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, like he's like a Hulk Hogan type of guy, all American kind of dude, right? Like you know the kind of guy that could crush a beer can on his head.
Yeah, and he's just crushing beers this whole time and other things on his head. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, he's just a big, massive American, like, beefy guy to counter our, like, slim, pretty Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah. Like, he actually plays, like, a relatively good sidekick in this film. Like, I kind of believe pretty quickly. Like, I thought the way that it, like, kind of opens up, you kind of think that maybe him and Frank are going to be at odds with each other, but they pretty like quickly form a cool bond. And even like I want to talk about their bond and how that kind of all falls into place in the movie, because I didn't even write this down, but there's just like all these little tiny scenes and moments that I'm excited to talk about with you when we get into that.
For sure.
And this is the other part where I guess I should say as well is that 95% of the actors in this movie are not actors first, and it really shows. These are not Oscar-worthy performances.
No.
So just know that going in. Just have fun. You know, you don't need to get mad because Jean-Claude Van Damme doesn't know how to act yet.
Yeah.
His pure charisma and goofball like charm just kind of helps you navigate this movie along with him.
Yeah.
The other characters I want to talk about, so the main villain of the movie is Chong Li, maybe the like most jacked villain I've ever seen on screen. Like, this guy is friggin' huge.
Yeah, he's just massive. Like, I feel like I've seen him in a bunch of other roles similar to this, but I like looking back at most of his movies, I actually haven't. But like, he's actually, you know what? I think I saw him in Enter the Dragon.
Yes, that's the one I was going to actually bring up. Like, so he's played by Bolo Young, who starred in Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. He's a really prominent Hong Kong actor, especially in like the martial arts genre. He's somebody that if you grew up watching 70s, 80s, 90s martial arts movies, you have seen him at some point in time because he's very prominent. Like, he actually tags along. He becomes like kind of the Jean-Claude group in a sense. Like, he stars in several other movies with him. They just have a good like relationship with each other. Like, and like I said, I actually think he might have one of the best performances in the movie. Like, I was genuinely intimidated by him.
Yeah.
And part of it is because he's so freaking big, like I said.
He's a natural villain, but he's also kind of silly. Like, the way he like bounces around.
I didn't think he was going to be the main villain in the opening 20 minutes of this until like some events happen and then it kind of becomes apparent. But like, he kind of, and again, part of it as well is until he takes his shirt off and gets in the ring and you're just like, that is a big dude.
Yeah.
Like, up until that point, you don't really take him seriously because he's kind of, like you said, got a little bit of a goofball vibe to him. Yeah.
Chong Li is the reigning champ of the Kumite, and he's just fearsome.
Like, he, in the previous Kumite, actually killed his opponent because, you know, this is a whole underground fight. And it's like, you know, it's not sanctioned or anything. It's not like there's a medical staff on hand kind of thing. Like,
you can get killed if you fuck up.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's like the big bad of the movie. The love interest of this film, because obviously this is the 80s, we got to check off all these boxes here, is Janice Kent, a reporter who is an American reporter who's come to Hong Kong to infiltrate the Kumite to publish a story on it. It's a performance by Leia Aries, who you probably don't know from anything else because she retired in the late 90s, early 2000s from acting. She's an interesting person, but anyway, that's really all you need to know about her. Is she is fascinated by the sport and trying to get in so that she can do a report on it, and her and Frank cross paths at some point during the film.
Yeah. Based on her role in this film, I'm surprised she continued to act.
There's not a lot going on facial expression wise for most of the movie there.
Yeah.
I did, but like we already disclosed, this is not a movie about performances, or performances outside of the ring.
Yeah.
But anyway, the other part of the plot that actually matters is because in the literal opening scene of the movie, when Frank takes a leave of absence, an unapproved leave of absence from the military to go do this fight, he's actually chased down by the military police. And we get a surprise performance from Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah.
Who we literally just talked about in Good Morning Vietnam. And this is his third actual appearance.
Oh, right. I forgot he was in that, too.
Yeah. He was in Platoon as well. So we've actually, this is becoming the Forrest Whitaker podcast, which is something that I would have never expected to ever say.
All his young stuff. Like, we've watched his first 3 movies or something. That's crazy.
You know, it's so funny because we actually talked about this in the Good Morning Vietnam episode. This is before the grumpy, older Forrest Whitaker kind of takes over the screen, right? That all of us know him as. So it's kind of fun. Like, he feels like even younger than he is in this movie compared to like a couple of those other movies I mentioned.
Yeah,
like, he has a really baby face to him.
Yeah, he's a baby face, and he's like playing this like, he's supposed to be like the suave, like hotshot detective, where he's balanced by how he normally acts as like the old man, like the old serious guy or something. So it's funny to see him as like what feels like an 18-year-old.
And then otherwise, like, I'm not going to get into details of any of the other actors in the film because none of them are like really prominent actors that you'll know. But I mean, if you really love this movie afterwards, like, there's a lot of interesting fighters like who, you know, are pioneers in the MMA sport, right? And so there's a lot of interesting stories with some of the other characters that make appearances in this film.
Yeah, and like some styles of fighting that like you still wouldn't know even now.
Yeah,
are actually represented here, which I think it's like some of them were a little crazy, but it was cool to see, and like they took it seriously, and I think they got like some actual fighters from those martial arts.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and some of the fight styles are really cool and unique to see. It's really just a showcase of fight talent here on display, which is really cool. So who's this movie for, and does it hold up to a modern watch? I guess I'll start and say that the primary fan of this film, which I fall into as well in this category, is fans of MMA fighting in the UFC. Like, plain and simple, right? Like, this is a pioneer in that. Like, there's going to be some cool legacy bits that we can talk about in relation to this movie. It's really cool. Like, I think we talked about this before we started recording, but it's really cool to see all of these performances here because it feels retro fresh in a way. Yeah. Like, this is an MMA, this is pre-MMA, like before specific rules have come into play, before like weight classes have come into play, like just all of these certain things. So there's things on display here that you're never going to see anywhere else.
Yeah, definitely agree. The history of just like fight movies, like this could branch over to just martial arts movies, like with all of the like Bruce Lee and Jet Li and all of those types of movies, or just like more North American style MMA.
This isn't a deep movie by any sense. Like, if you're coming to this movie, you're coming to this movie to watch fights. Like, this is essentially an extended fight montage. It's like watching 10 fights crammed into an hour and a half. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Probably
like,
more than that.
I think there's at least 15, maybe 20 fights that you see clips of, some longer than others. Yeah, like the main character ones are a lot more fun, and like they just have crazy ways of like finishing fights, and it's pretty fun. It's well done.
And that's primarily who this movie's for, although I think most people are going to have fun with this one. Like, it's hard not to have fun with this movie when you can tell that every single person involved in this is having a good time making this movie.
Yeah.
And like, I'm never going to rip on a movie. Like, obviously this movie isn't trying to be like one of the greatest films of all time, but it knows what it wants to be, and that's what it's executing, and that's what it's executing very well. Yeah. So I can be a fan of that, right?
If you're a fan of any type of cult movie, this is a massive one within the fight realm. Even when it was released, they didn't expect it to do so well. It became like a cult phenomenon right away. If that counts as cult phenomenon.
I think that, like, I was thinking about this earlier. I think that this movie is so primed to be a cult hit, just in even like the nature of the film taking place around an underground fight tournament. It's so primed to be a cult movie, and it's just great. Like, I had an absolute blast with this one. Although here's the disclaimer here, and this is partially whether this movie holds up to a modern watch. The first 10-15 minutes of this movie are rough.
Yeah.
The performances are not good. The editing choices are just like somewhat bizarre, honestly.
You know what's funny? I read that I think Jean-Claude Van Damme edited some of this movie because it was such low budget, and like he just wanted to get it made.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that just shows the passion going into this film, that like the actor was like, I will sit down in front of a computer and work my way through the editing of this movie just so that it gets made, kind of thing. But, you know, like it does. Oh, does it not hold up in that first 10-15 minutes? Like there's just like bad acting too. Yeah, like this is the worst part of the movie by far. Like it's just like, let's get the exposition of this story out of the way so that for the next like hour and 10 minutes we can just enjoy fights.
Exactly. Yeah. Like the young Frank Duke's character, like the actor, absolutely horrible. Like
it's so bad.
Yeah. And some of I know what I did like is seeing his trainer, his like the master.
Yeah, Tanaka.
Yeah. So like that was kind of worthwhile, and some of it's basically within this first montage you see his master just hitting him with a stick over and over again. Like it's brutal, his training, and that's pretty cool because it does build his backstory and character about like being the best. Like we get all of that right up front.
Yeah, I think once you get to that point in time, like I'm starting to get reeled back in, but it did take me a few minutes with like just how brutal those opening scenes are. And we'll talk about them in more detail during the deep dive, but that's just something that I was just like, I don't know if I'm going to like this movie in the first 10-15 minutes. So that's just something to like know going in, because I'm not somebody who turns a movie off if I'm not enjoying in the first 10-15 minutes. Like I'll usually give it like a pretty long time to decide. Like I turn off very few movies, even if they're bad.
Same.
Yeah. But this is one where you just have to like let the exposition run through so that you can get into the good stuff.
Yeah.
And that kind of actually segues really nicely into my one scene to sell a movie. And this is part of what I wanted to discuss with this as well, because I find it really funny on movie clips that the first 4 movie clips are actually the opening 10-15 minutes of the movie, which is like somehow they picked. I kind of understand where they went with it, because they wanted to hit on plot beats, but like any one of the montages for like 2-3 minutes would just been like so much more rewatchable as a movie clip than any of the first 4 like movie clips that they have.
Exactly. I'm surprised they're even on YouTube.
Yeah. Just if you need to go back and remember just how brutal the first 10-15 minutes are, just go watch the first like 4 movie clips. The movie clip that I did pick, I know what you want, I know what I want. Like it's what you came here to see. It's one of the fights. It's Frank Dukes versus Paco. It's the 7th clip, so it's actually relatively far along in the movie. There's probably some minor spoilers involved in it, but if you've never seen this movie, it doesn't really matter. Also, the plot of this movie is completely inconsistent and doesn't exist more than like skin deep, right? So
you're just running through a fight movie. Like there's no ups and downs. It's just constant fights, and then like there's the down is like a slight like 1 minute scene outside of the
there's
fights,
like
and then it goes
there's
back.
obviously like the third act like core problem that arises kind of thing that the hero has to solve. Like, you know, there's a little bit of a 3-act structure to the film, but I know what you came here to see. I know what I came here to see. The movie clip that I'm recommending is a fight clip, obviously.
Yeah. If I was to pick one that isn't completely spoilerful, it would be a quarter trick. And that just shows like how cool Jean-Claude Van Damme is. Like this started his career, and like it's basically like peak him as well. He doesn't change that much. He's just always like this, but he's like suave, just like
and
a
campy.
beast. Campy, and he's also just jacked as hell.
That's a good scene because as well, like you said, because it puts on full display like how campy this movie is, like how low budget this film is, but it's still just genuinely entertaining.
Yeah.
So I like that one as a secondary pick, but I'm always gonna stand for one of the fights as this one being the recommended scene to sell you on this movie.
Yeah, that's good.
When to watch? The beautiful part about this movie is it's an hour and a half.
Yeah.
We don't get those movies anymore. This movie knows that it cannot go over like an hour and a half, an hour 35 minutes, and it stays within that. God bless you, whoever edited this, Jean-Claude Van Damme, for editing us down to an hour 35, because we honestly, if anything, we could have cut another 5-10 minutes of plot and just went into the fights. Like, I don't even care. And more on that later, because I have lots of thoughts about that and how I would re-edit this movie. But where I'm getting at with this is that because it's an hour and a half, you could watch it whenever you want, because it's an hour and a half. And it's great whenever you want to watch it. Like, I could see myself watching this on a Wednesday night, which is what I did.
Yeah.
I could see myself watching this at 10 o'clock on a Friday night before I go to bed. It's a great late night movie. Like, you know, the stakes aren't super high. The movie isn't super like deep by any means. It's a great Saturday movie because it's fun and exciting. There's just no bad time to watch this movie. I don't know about you, but
I can agree with that. Like, I think there's some great, like, you could probably squeeze in like 3 fight movies on a Sunday or Saturday or something like that.
Yeah.
Where and like this would slot right into any real like fight movie lineup because it's a classic.
Yeah, it really is. Like the action, that's something that we didn't say in the does this movie hold up, but the action's really exciting. Like, yeah, not all of the punches land and you can tell, but some of the punches honestly do land. And that's something to talk about in the deep dive because there was some stuff that happened on set.
Yeah. So keep
and
listening.
Like that's the thing, right? Is these are all trained fighters. So they all know how to throw punches and everything as well. But there's kind of that element of like WWE where there's that fight choreography that goes into this, like, like knowing how to roll with a punch and stuff like that. And so I think that these fighters, above a lot of the fights that you're going to see that end up being like heavily CGI, like when you and I talked about the new Roadhouse movie, or like, blurry cam stuff because we haven't really trained our actors to like put on a good show kind of thing. No, like everybody coming into these to put on a fight performance are here primarily because of their fighting abilities.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't get many movies with this many like good fighters doing this.
Yeah. Where to watch right now, it is streaming on Tubi with ads, which is where I watched it, and I wanted to highlight that first because I've been on like a Tubi tear the last month since we've done the movie draft, just watching like old 70s movies. I have been having so much fun on Tubi.
Nice.
It's just like a free streaming platform.
Yeah.
Like I've watched just so much weird niche movies, but it's also streaming on Amazon Prime. So you can check it out there. Like that's where it's probably most people are going to watch it. But like I said, I do recommend Tubi because not only are you going to find like this on Tubi, this is where like all of the movies that kind of fit into this cult genre are also going to be readily available, which is pretty sick.
Yeah. Because they're not like a lot of other ones that are similar to this didn't get the same recognition as this, yet some are still just as good.
Yeah, for sure. And otherwise, that is all you need to know for the primer episode, I think, unless you have any other thoughts before we wrap up.
I was just going to say I was considering watching Raging Bull instead because it's another like classic fight movie, and but I think it's like too good. Like it's one of the best movies of all time. Like it's up there. Everybody would know about De Niro, and if you know about De Niro, you might see Raging Bull. So I wanted to go switch to something that I think people haven't seen enough Jean-Claude Van Damme, and they're fun. So
yeah, and I'm honestly really glad that you picked this one and I was kind of trying to influence your choice to watch this one because like I am a massive Martin Scorsese fan, and actually like Raging Bull is actually my biggest Martin Scorsese hole. I haven't seen that movie yet either, but I'm very partial to cult movies. Like obviously my choice, we did Tremors this year. I love these kind of movies. Even though they're bad, they're still so good. Like this is like what I like about cinema, right? Is that you can do something that this is borderline feels experimental because of like how non-plot centric this movie is. But it works from a cinematic standpoint, right? As a movie.
Yeah.
So
like it's funny because like with how bad it is, you almost think it's real. Like because these aren't actors, and like if if his actor was actually an actor that was big already, he probably wouldn't have done the jumping thing that he did because he looked ridiculous. Like things would be too manicured, you know what I mean? But this was like people were fairly authentic.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that's it. I hope that we sold you on this movie because it's an absolute blast and it's worth your hour and a half time on a Wednesday night or whenever you got time to check this out, because I had an absolute blast with this one, and I hope you do as well. And we'll see you next week for the deep dive.
Yeah, get into it.